Vivid verses.
The call came on a Saturday afternoon, which I remember because I was making coffee and had the weekend mapped out with a rare, clean pleasure. 2 days with no obligations. I've been looking forward to it in the low-key way that only becomes possible when you've learned to stop filling silence with noise. Imogen called. Her voice had that particular texture, slightly too bright, like someone who'd rehearsed a casual tone, that I'd learned to read the way a pilot reads instrument gauges. No alarm, just data. Hey, she said, just checking in. Checking in, I repeated. I pour the coffee. How was yesterday? The wedding. Her best friend Cassandra's wedding. Imogen had been maid of honor, and I hadn't gone. We discussed it and agreed that the weekend would be better used separately, her with Cassandra's family and the full machinery of the event, me finishing a project that had been eating into every spare hour. It had seemed practical, clean, the kind of arrangement two adults who trust each other make without ceremony. It was beautiful, she said. Really beautiful. You would have loved the venue. I let a beat pass. The brightness in her voice had a wobble underneath it, like a note held slightly too long. How are you feeling? Tired, she said. You know how those things are. Long day. Right. I sat with my coffee, and we talked for another 10 minutes about nothing. The food, the speeches, the drive back. She sounded normal. Almost. The almost was a small thing, but I'd been paying attention for long enough that small things registered. We said goodbye, and I held the phone for a moment after the call ended, not thinking anything specific, just sitting with that low-grade awareness that something had happened that I didn't yet have the shape of. It was Cassandra's sister who told me. Her name was Becca, and she called 3 days later. I didn't know her well. We met twice at dinners where Imogen and Cassandra sat at the center, and the rest of us arranged ourselves around them like furniture. Becca was younger, quieter, with a directness that I'd noticed and filed away as someone who didn't see the point in managing impressions. She called from a number I didn't recognize, and I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm glad I didn't. I need to tell you something, she said, without preamble, because I don't think anyone else is going to. I was standing in my kitchen again. I seem to have received most of the significant information of my life while standing in that kitchen. All right, I said. At the wedding. Imogen and Griffin, the groom. A pause. Not for effect. She was choosing words carefully, the way people do when they understand the weight of what they're carrying. They were together. During the reception, one of the bridesmaids found out. It wasn't nothing. I didn't say anything for a moment. I know this is a lot, Becca said. I'm not doing this to cause problems. I'm doing it because you deserve to know. I appreciate that, I said, and I meant it. Completely. After the call, I sat down. Not because my legs were unreliable, they weren't, but because sitting seemed like the right response to information that required processing. I'm someone who thinks in sequences, in chains of cause and effect, and right now the chain was assembling itself with a clarity that was almost impersonal. Griffin, the groom, Cassandra's new husband of approximately 11 hours. Imogen had been maid of honor, had stood at the front of the room in satin, had held Cassandra's bouquet, had given a speech I'd seen drafted on her laptop. 3 revisions, each one more sentimental than the last. And then, somewhere in the hours of flowers and vows and dancing, she had slept with the man her best friend had just married. I sat with that for a while. I called her that evening. Not impulsively. I spent a few hours being methodical, which is how I'm built. I'm not someone who makes decisions from the floor of an emotion. I make them from a position after I've understood what I'm actually dealing with. What I was dealing with was this, a specific act, a specific betrayal, and a story she would need to tell herself about it. Those 3 things. The act I couldn't change. The betrayal was its own category of damage, separate from what it meant for us. The story, that was what I needed to hear because it would tell me everything about what kind of person I was actually in a relationship with. I called her, and she answered on the second ring. "Hey," she said. The brightness again. Calibrated. "Hey, are you home?" "Yeah, just got in." "You okay?" "I heard about what happened at the wedding." Silence. The kind that has texture. Not empty, but full of something held back. "What do you mean?" she said. Carefully. "I mean Griffin. I mean what happened during the reception." Another pause. And then something I hadn't expected. Not denial, not immediate apology, but a kind of recalibration. I could almost hear it happening. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you," she said. That was interesting. Not it didn't happen or who told you that, but a pivot straight to narrative management. She'd already accepted that this conversation was coming. She'd been deciding on her version. "Tell me what exactly?" I said. It wasn't what it sounds like. "Griffin and I have history. You know that. We dated before he met Cassandra, and things between us were never really. There was always unfinished business. What happened was just," she paused, "closure. It was me closing a chapter that had been open for too long. I'll let that sit between us for a moment. Closure." I turned the word over, felt its edges. What it was doing in her sentence. Not describing what happened, but replacing it. The act itself, stripped of its consequences and redressed in therapeutic language. Closure implied intention, healing, resolution. It implied the act was for her benefit, not against anyone else's. It was a remarkable piece of construction. Even in the moment, some part of me could appreciate the architecture of it. "You slept with your best friend's husband," I said, "on their wedding day. I know how it sounds." "I'm not describing how it sounds. I'm describing what happened." She went quiet. "What you're calling closure," I said, "required Cassandra's husband to participate. On the day, he married her. That's not a chapter being closed. That's a choice, made by two people, to betray someone who trusted you more than anyone." It was a moment of weakness, she said. Her voice had shifted, the brightness gone, something rawer underneath. I wasn't thinking clearly. The whole day was emotional, and being around him again brought up. "Imogen." I said her name without edge, without heat, just to mark a pause in what she was building. "I'm not asking you to defend it. I'm listening to what you call it." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm paying attention to the language you're using." She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had a new quality, something that was trying to reach me, to find the version of this conversation where I was troubled but accessible. "I'm sorry. I know this is a shock. I know it's going to take time to process. But I need you to understand that it had nothing to do with you and me. It was about something old and unresolved, and I handled it badly, and I know that, but I've heard what I needed to hear," I said. She stopped. "I'm not angry," I said, which was true. "And I'm not going to ask you more questions or try to understand more than I already do. I think I have a clear picture." "What does that mean?" "Softer now. Uncertain. It means I'm going to need a few days to sort out some practical things. After that, we won't have much to discuss except logistics." "You're ending things," said flatly, like a fact she was testing. "Yes, over one mistake." I noticed that too. The denominator shrinking, from betraying your best friend's husband on her wedding day to one mistake. Each reformulation paring away context until what remained was as small and forgivable as possible. "Good night, Imogen," I said. I ended the call. The next 48 hours were logistical. I've always been able to function in the narrow space between deciding something and the emotions catching up, and that space is useful. I made a list. I moved through it. I'd been staying at her place most nights, keeping a meaningful portion of my life there. Clothes, books, the small accumulated debris of a relationship that had made itself at home. I packed it systematically, not vindicatively. No theater of removal, nothing designed to signal pain. I just packed, carried things to my car in 2 trips, and left the key on the kitchen counter with a short note, explaining I'd returned it and wishing her well with a sincerity I actually felt. The note took me 4 drafts. The first was too long. The second was too cold. The third tried too hard to be kind and ended up sounding like a performance of kindness. The fourth was 18 words and said exactly what needed saying. She called while I was carrying the second load. I watched her name on the screen and let it go. Not cruelty. I'd said what needed to be said, and there was nothing new I could add to it. Picking up would only be an invitation for a conversation that would serve her need for process, not any shared purpose between us. She called twice more that evening. 3 texts after that, each one longer than the last. The first said she understood this was a lot, and she wasn't asking me to forgive her right away, just to keep the door open. The second said she'd been thinking about it, and she believed what they had was worth more than a single terrible decision, and that walking away meant he'd never really believed in her. The third one, the longest, said she accepted full responsibility for what had happened, but that she needed me to understand she'd been in an emotionally volatile state that day, that old wounds had surfaced in ways she hadn't been equipped to handle, and that what I was doing was punishing her for being human. I read all 3. I read them carefully because I think you owe people that the basic courtesy of actually hearing what they're saying rather than constructing a response while they're still talking. And here's what I heard. Not accountability, but a careful architecture of accountability. Each message accepted responsibility in the first sentence and then spent the rest of the message contextualizing it into near non-existence. The emotional volatility, the old wounds, the unresolved history, each one a brick in a structure designed to reach one conclusion, that what she'd done was understandable and that my response was disproportionate. Being human, she'd said, as if Cassandra wasn't. I didn't respond to the texts. Not that night. Not the following day. My friend Rowan heard about it through channels I wasn't tracking, word moves in the networks that form around couples, and the wedding had been attended by people who knew us. He called on the third day, careful and direct in the way he always is, and asked me how I was doing. Fine, I said. You moved out. Yes. That was fast. There wasn't a reason to take longer, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Rowan has a gift for sitting in silences without trying to fill them, which is one of the reasons I've kept him close. Do you want to talk about it? Not extensively, I said, but I'll say this. I don't think she's a bad person. I think she's someone who, when she does a bad thing, immediately starts working on the story of why it doesn't mean what it appears to mean. And I think that the problem that's got nothing to do with me, and that I can't fix, and that I shouldn't have to manage. Yeah, Rowan said. That tracks. She called it closure. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. With someone else's groom. The day of the wedding. Another pause. How's Cassandra? I didn't know. That wasn't my relationship to navigate, and I had enough respect for both of them not to insert myself into whatever was happening between them. That's between them, I said. He called me practical. I told him that wasn't quite the word. Practical implied the decision had been made for efficiency. This had been made because some things, once seen clearly, don't leave room for much deliberation. You don't deliberate about whether to step back from something that's already over. You just step back. She came to the building on the 5th day. I live in a place with a lobby, and the front desk called up to tell me someone was waiting. I went down because avoiding the conversation entirely felt like cowardice, and I've never been particularly drawn to cowardice. Imogen in person was different from Imogen on the phone. She looked like she hadn't been sleeping well. Not dramatically disheveled, nothing designed, just the particular gravity that accumulates around someone who's been carrying something heavy. She was wearing a coat I'd always liked, a dark blue one she'd had since before we met. I just want to talk, she said. The lobby had a small seating area near the window, 2 chairs, and a low table with a plant that was doing reasonably well for a lobby plant. I gestured to it, and we sat down. You've been ignoring my messages, she said. I read all of them, I said. It seemed to recalibrate her. She'd been prepared, I think, for me to have not engaged with them at all, for a clean wall of silence she could argue against. The fact that I'd read them and still not responded was a different kind of answer. Then I've been thinking about this, she said. Yes. And I'm not trying to minimize it. I considered that. I know you believe that. She looked at me for a moment. There was something in her face that I recognized. Not anger, not manipulation, but a kind of genuine bewilderment. She hadn't understood, yet, that what I was doing wasn't punitive. She was still reading it as an emotional response, something produced by hurt that could theoretically be addressed. I think, she said carefully, that you're making a permanent decision based on one moment. I'm making a decision based on what that moment showed me. I said, those are different things. What does that mean? It means the act itself is one piece of information. How you talked about it afterward is another. The language you used, calling it closure, talking about emotional volatility, asking me not to punish you for being human, that's a pattern I can recognize. It's not unique to this. It's how you handle things you don't want to be fully accountable for. She was quiet for a moment. Not defensive. Something more complicated than that. That's not fair, she said finally. I'm not making a fairness argument. I'm describing what I've observed. I kept my voice even because there was nothing to raise it about. I wasn't performing calm. I was actually calm. You're someone who processes guilt by immediately contextualizing it. That might work fine in some situations. It doesn't work for me because I need the people in my life to be able to hold what they've done without immediately starting to explain it into a smaller shape. She looked at the lobby plant for a moment. So if there's nothing I can say, I don't think this is a conversation problem, I said. I think you're hoping that if you find the right words, I'll hear them and reevaluate. But what I'd actually need isn't words. It's a different relationship to accountability than the one you have. And that's not something you can produce in a lobby in 5 minutes. And even if you could, it wouldn't change what already happened. You've already decided, she said. I decided on the phone, I said. The rest has just been logistics. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the street was doing its ordinary Saturday afternoon business. People moving past with bags and dogs, and the general unhurried momentum of a weekend. It was strange how steadily the world ran alongside grief. I don't understand how you can be this calm about it, she said. Not accusingly, more like a genuine question. Because I'm not angry, I said. I don't think you're a monster. I think you made a serious choice and then spent the next week working very hard not to call it a choice. That's not monstrous. It's not something I can be with. There's a difference. She nodded slowly. I watched her take that in, not dismiss it, not argue with it, but actually sit with it, which was, I thought, the most honest thing she'd done since the call. I'm sorry, she said. And this time it didn't come with a qualifier. Just the two words sitting on their own. I know, I said. We sat for another few seconds, both looking at the middle distance. I should go, she said. Probably. She stood, and I stood, and we looked at each other in the way that people do at the end of things. Not looking for something, just acknowledging the fact of it. Take care of yourself, I said. She nodded once and turned and walked through the lobby doors and out into the Saturday afternoon. I watched her go. Then I took the elevator back upstairs, made myself a cup of tea, and sat by the window for a while. 2 weeks later, Becca texted. Not Cassandra. I didn't expect to hear from Cassandra, and understood why. But Becca, who had called me from an unknown number with careful words and no agenda, sent a message that said simply, Hope you're doing okay. For what it's worth, I think you handled it well. I appreciated that. I wrote back, Thank you for calling. It mattered. It did. There's something clarifying about someone who tells you a hard truth, not because it benefits them, but because they believe you deserve to have it. No spin, no management, No consideration of how it would land in the network of relationships around the event. Just the bare fact and the respect to assume you could handle it. I've thought about that distinction since, between the people who decide what you're ready to know and the people who simply tell you. The first kind is more common. The second kind is rarer and worth holding on to when you find them. I ran into Imogen once more about a month after the lobby conversation. It was at a coffee place we'd both liked, the kind of neighborhood overlap that happens when two people have built their routines into the same geography. She was with a friend I didn't recognize, and I was by myself with a book. We made eye contact across the room. She gave a small nod. I gave one back. That was it. No conversation, no loaded pauses, nothing designed to show either of us how we were doing. Just two people who had known each other well, passing in a shared space, each going on about their day. That, I think, is the best possible version of how those intersections go. Not coldness, not performance of indifference, just the acknowledgement that the other person is there and that their existence in the world isn't a threat or a wound, but also that there's nothing left to navigate. I went back to my book. She ordered what she'd ordered and sat with her friend by the window. The coffee place did its regular business around both of us. Rowan asked me once, a few months later, over drinks on his back patio with the kind of ease that comes from not having to perform anything, whether I regretted any of it. The decisiveness, the speed. I thought about that for a moment. No, I said, but I've thought about whether decisiveness is the right word for it. What would you call it? I think it was just seeing clearly. Once you see something clearly, you don't really have a decision to make. The decision's already made. You're just catching up to it. He refilled his glass. Some people see things clearly and still stay. Some people stay because they hope what they saw clearly will become unclear again, I said. I don't think that's generosity. I think it's a kind of self-punishment. He considered that. She said you destroyed her life. I'd heard that through the network, the way things travel. I know. You don't seem troubled by it. I'm not indifferent to it, I said. I hope she's doing well. I genuinely do. But you can wish someone well and still understand that the version of events where I'm the one who destroyed things requires a very particular telling of the story. It requires the story to start from the moment I left and not from the moment she chose to do what she did. It requires me to be the cause rather than the effect. The patio was quiet except for ambient neighborhood noise, someone's distant music, wind in the trees, the ordinary sound of Saturday evening. She needed you to stay, Rowan said. She needed someone to stay, I said. She needed consequences not to be real. Those are different needs, and the second one I couldn't help with. He nodded. I looked out at the garden, small, well-kept, the kind of private space that accumulates character slowly and holds it quietly. There's a particular quality to outdoor light at that hour, the way it tilts golden and unhurried, that makes the world seem patient with itself. I don't think she's a bad person, I said again. I'd said it before. I meant it each time. I think she's someone who hasn't learned that the stories we tell about what we've done have to match what we've actually done, or the gap starts to cost everyone around us. That gap was the problem, not her. Very reasonable of you, Rowan said, with the small dry note that passes for warmth between us. It wasn't reason, I said. It was just, I didn't have it in me to be the person who teaches that lesson by accepting the cost of the gap. Some people are willing to do that. I wasn't. We stayed out there until the light went and the air cooled and the need for a jacket made itself known. Rowan's partner came out and we moved inside, and the evening became the thing evenings become when you're in good company with nothing to defend and nothing to perform. I drove home later with the windows cracked, the night air finding the car, the quiet satisfaction of a life that had resumed its proper proportions, not smaller for the loss, just reconfigured around the shape of what was actually there. I learned something, not a grand lesson, Nothing that would transfer neatly into advice. Just the understanding that clarity, once arrived at, is its own form of mercy for both people, even if only one of them sees it that way. The other thing I learned was simpler. You can wish someone warmth without providing the fire yourself. That distinction matters. It might be the only one that does.
Thanks for listening.